Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer, Megan Tingley Books, Little Brown and Company. It's the 6th installment of the Twilight Saga. First chapter, first sight. This was the time of day when I most wished I were able to sleep. High school. Or was purgatory the right word? If there were any way to atone for my sins, this ought to count towards the tally in some measure. The tedium was something I grew used to. Every day seemed more impossibly monotonous than the last. Perhaps this could be even considered my form of sleep, if sleep was defined as an inert state between active periods. I stared at the cracks running through the plaster in the far corner of the cafeteria, imagining patterns into them that weren't there. It was one way to tune out the voices that babbled like a gush of a river inside my head. Several hundred of these voices I ignored out of boredom. When it came to the human mind, I'd heard it all before and then some. Today, all thoughts were consumed with the trivial drama of a new addition to the small student body. It took little to work them up. I'd seen the new face repeated in thought after thought from every angle. Just an ordinary human girl. The excitement over her arrival was tiresomely predictable. It was the same reaction as one would get from flashing a shiny object at a group of toddlers. Half the sheep-like males were already imagining themselves infatuated with her, just because she was something new to look at. I tried harder to tune them out. Only 4 voices did I block out of courtesy rather than distaste. My family, my 2 brothers and 2 sisters, who were so used to the lack of privacy in my presence that they rarely worried about it. I gave them what I could. I tried not to listen if I could help it. Try as I may, still, I knew. Rosalie was thinking, as usual, about herself. Her mind was stagnant, with few surprises. She'd caught sight of her profile in the reflection of someone's glasses, and she was mulling over her own perfection. No one else's hair was closer to true gold. No one else's shape was quite so perfectly an hourglass. No one else's face was such a flawless, symmetrical oval. She didn't compare herself to the humans here. That juxtaposition would have been laughable, absurd. She thought of others like us, none of them her equal. Emmett's usually carefree expression was crumpled with frustration. Even now, he ran one enormous hand through his ebony curls, twisting the hair into his fist, still fuming over the wrestling match he'd lost to Jasper during the night. It would take all his limited patience to make it to the end of the school day to orchestrate a rematch. Hearing Emmett's thoughts never felt intrusive because he never thought one thing that he wouldn't say aloud or put into action. Perhaps I only felt guilty reading the others' minds because I know there were things inside that they wouldn't want me to know. If Rosalie's mind was a stagnant pool, then Emmett's was a lake with no shadow, glass clear. And Jasper was suffering. I suppressed a sigh. Edward. Alice called my name in her head and had my attention at once. It was just the same as having my name called aloud. I was glad my given name had fallen out of style in the last few decades. It had been annoying in the past. Anytime anyone thought of any Edward, my head would turn automatically. My head didn't turn now. Alice and I were good at these private conversations. It was rare that anyone caught us. I kept my eyes on the lines in the plaster. "How is he holding up?" she asked me. I frowned, just a small change in the set of my mouth. Nothing that would tip off the others. I could easily be frowning out of boredom. Jasper had been still for too long. He wasn't performing human tics the way we all must. Constantly in motion so as to not to stand out, like Emmett pulling at his hair, Rosalie crossing her legs first one way then the next, Alice tapping her toes against the linoleum, or me moving my head to stare at different patterns in the wall. Jasper looked paralyzed. His lean form ramrod straight. Even his honey hair seemed not to react to the air wafting from the vents. Alice's mental tone was alarmed now, and I saw in her mind that she was watching Jasper in her peripheral vision. Is there any danger? She searched ahead into the immediate future, skimming through the visions of monotony for the source behind my frown. Even as she did so, she remembered to tuck one tiny fist under her sharp chin and blink regularly. She brushed a tuft of her short, jagged black hair out of her eyes. I turned my head slowly to the left, as if looking at the bricks of the wall, sighed, then turned to the right, back to the cracks in the ceiling. The others would assume I was playing human. Only Alice knew I was shaking my head. She relaxed. Let me know if it gets too bad. I moved only my eyes up to the ceiling above and back down. Thanks for doing this. I was glad I couldn't answer her. What would I say? My pleasure? It was hardly that. I didn't enjoy turning into Jasper's struggles. Was it really necessary to experiment this way? Wouldn't the safer path be to just admit that he might never be able to handle his thirst as well as the rest of us could and not push his limits? Why flirt with disaster? It had been 2 weeks since our last hunting trip. That was not an immensely difficult span of time for the rest of us. A little uncomfortable occasionally if a human being walked too close, if the wind blew the wrong way, but humans rarely walk too close. Their instincts told them what their conscious minds would never understand. We were a danger that must be avoided. Jasper was very dangerous right now. It did not happen often, but every now and then I would be struck by the obliviousness of the humans around us. We were also accustomed to it. We always expected it, but occasionally it seemed more glaring than usual. None of them noticed us here, lounging at the battered cafeteria table, though an ambush of tigers sprawled in our spaces would be less lethal than we were. All they saw were 5 odd-looking people, close enough to pass for human. It was hard to imagine surviving with senses so incredibly dull. At that moment, a small girl paused at the end of the closest table to ours, stopping to talk to a friend. She tossed her short, sandy hair, combing her fingers through it. The heaters blew her scent in our direction. I was used to the way that scent made me feel, the dry ache in my throat, the hollow yearn in my stomach, the automatic tightening of my muscles, the excess flow of venom in my mouth. This was all quite normal, usually easy to ignore. It was harder just now, with the reaction stronger, doubled, as I monitored Jasper. Jasper was letting his imagination get away from him. He was picturing it, picturing himself getting up from his seat next to Alice and going to stand beside the little girl, thinking of leaning down and in as if he were going to whisper in her ear, and letting his lips touch the arch of her throat, imagining how the hot flow of her pulse beneath the weak barrier of her skin would feel under his mouth. I kicked his chair. He met my gaze, his black eyes resentful for a second, and then looked down. I could hear shame and rebellion war in his head. "Sorry," Jasper muttered. I shrugged. "You weren't going to do anything," Alice murmured to him, soothing his mortification. I could see that. I fought back the frown that would give away her lie. We had to stick together, Alice and I. It wasn't easy being the freaks among those who were already freaks. We protected each other's secrets. "It helps a little if you think of them as people," Alice suggested, her high musical voice racing too fast for human ears to understand, if any had been close enough to hear. "Her name is Whitney. She has a baby sister she adores. Her mother invited Esme to that garden party. Do you remember?" "I know who she is," Jasper said curtly. He turned away to stare out one of the small windows that were spaced just under the eaves around the long room. His tone ended the conversation. He would have to hunt tonight. It was ridiculous to take risks like this, trying to test his strength, to build his endurance. Jasper should just accept his limitations and work within them. Alice sighed slightly and stood, taking her tray of food, her prop as it were, with her, and leaving him alone. She knew when he'd had enough of her encouragement. Though Rosalie and Emmett were more flagrant about the relationship, it was Alice and Jasper who knew each other's every need as well as their own, as if they could read minds too, but only each other's. "Edward." Reflex action, I turned to the sound of my name being called, though it wasn't being called, just thought. My eyes locked for half a second with a pair of large, chocolate brown human eyes set in a pale, heart-shaped face. I knew the face, though I'd never seen it before this moment. It had been foremost in every human head today. The new student, Isabella Swan, daughter of the town's chief of police, brought to live here by some new custody situation. Bella, she'd corrected everyone who'd used her full name. I looked away bored. It took me a second to realize that she had not been the one to think my name. Of course she's already crushing on the Cullens, I heard the first thought continue. Now I recognized the voice. Jessica Stanley. It had been a while since she'd bothered me with her internal chatter. What a relief it had been when she'd gotten over her misplaced fixation. It used to be nearly impossible to escape her constant, ridiculous daydreams. I'd wished at the time that I could explain to her exactly what would have happened if my lips and the teeth behind them had gotten anywhere near her. That would have silenced any of her annoying fantasies. The thought of her reaction almost made me smile. "Fat lot of good it will do her," Jessica went on. "She's not really even that pretty. I don't even know why Eric is staring at her so much, or Mike." She flinched mentally on the latter name. Her new obsession, the generally popular Mike Newton, was completely oblivious to her. Apparently he was not as oblivious to the new girl. Another child reaching for the shiny object. This put a mean edge to Jessica's thoughts, though she was outwardly cordial to the newcomer as she explained to her the commonly held knowledge about my family. The new student must have asked about us. "Everyone's looking at me today too," Jessica thought smugly. "Isn't it lucky Bella has 2 classes with me? I bet Mike will want to ask me what she's..." I tried to block the inane chatter out of my head before the petty and the trivial could drive me mad. "Jessica Stanley is giving the new Swan girl all the dirty laundry on the Cullen clan," I murmured to Emmett as a distraction. He chuckled under his breath. "I hope she's making it good," he thought. Rather unimaginative, actually, just the barest hint of scandal. Not an ounce of horror. I'm a little disappointed. "And the new girl, is she disappointed in the gossip as well?" I listened to her, what this new girl Bella thought of Jessica's story. What did she see when she looked at the strange, chalky-skinned family that was universally avoided? It was my responsibility to know her reaction. I acted as a lookout, for the lack of a better word, for my family, to protect us. If anyone ever grew suspicious, I could give us an early warning and an easy retreat. It happened occasionally. Some human with an active imagination would see us in the character of a book or a movie. Usually they got it wrong, but it was better to move on somewhere than to risk scrutiny. Rarely, extremely rarely, someone would guess right. We didn't give them a chance to test their hypothesis. We simply disappeared, to become no more than a frightening memory. That hadn't happened for decades. I heard nothing, though I listened close beside where Jessica's frivolous internal monologue continued to gush. It was as if there was no one sitting beside her. How peculiar. Had the girl moved? That didn't seem likely, as Jessica was still babbling at her. I looked up, feeling off balance, checking on my extra hearing. It wasn't something I ever had to do. Again, my gaze locked onto those wide brown eyes. She was sitting right where she had been before, looking at us. A natural thing to be doing, I suppose, as Jessica was still regaling her with local gossip about the Cullens. Thinking about us, too, would be normal. But I couldn't hear a whisper. That's it.